again, I am Tom and this is Real Six String. So today's lesson, we're going to be working our way up to bar chords. As I was putting it all together, it turned out to be quite a long lesson, so I thought I'd break off this first bit and call it pre-bar chords so that we'd have a bit more of a progression. The full bar chords are going to be a mixture of some of the chords we're using here and the power chords we've worked on previously. So it's an idea to brush up on both of those and you'll have a much easier time of getting started with the next lesson. We're going to be working on some of the earlier forms of bar chords. So that means we're going to have to bar certain strings with our fingers and then hold other ones down. So it can be really tricky because you've got to do two separate things. One finger has got to be completely flat and the other ones you need to keep arched up. So the chords that we're going to be covering are going to be our D minor 7, our F major, and our F minor. And the final thing before we get started is make sure that you only go as far with these lessons as you feel comfortable. If there's bits you're finding a bit tricky, you're much better off spending a little bit of time practicing it, whether that means pausing the video or coming back to it after a bit of practice, and then being able to progress at your own pace, as there's things that people are going to find easier, things that everyone's going to find harder. So it's important to take it at your own pace and make sure that you're not moving too quickly. Otherwise, you'll probably get to the end of the lesson and not really understand it. And that all being said, let's get started. First part of the lesson, what we've got to do is to bar a couple of strings with one finger. So in this instance, what we're going to be doing is barring the first fret on our first and second strings with our first finger. So just there, your index finger covers both of those strings and it makes sure that they're both held down. Incidentally, this is also the verse part in Smells Like Teen Spirit. So a little something for you. Okay, so make sure that those are both held down. It's really important that you're keeping that index finger as flat as possible because naturally we want to arch it up to avoid the other strings. But in this instance, we want to make sure that it's covering both of them as evenly as possible. Okay, and when that starts to feel more natural, we're going to bring over our middle finger to the second fret of our third string. So then just play the three of those separately to make sure they ring out. So here, it's really easy to start arching up that index finger. So make sure you're keeping it flat. And likewise, it's really easy to flatten your middle finger so it doesn't hold that down its own string or it blocks the one underneath. So once again, it's a very tricky part, keeping your middle finger arched over and keeping the other one flat. But if you keep working on that and it's the tiny movements, if something's not ringing out, try and flatten that one a bit more and keep that one arched up. On top of that, try and keep this barring finger as close to the fret as you can, because the further back it is, the more of a stretch you've got for the next one. Okay, so just make sure that you're keeping your first finger as flat as possible, quite close to the fret, but make sure you're not going over or ending up with something completely different. And then make sure you're keeping your middle finger arched up as possible and let it all ring out. So when you're ready with that one, that's our D minor 7. And you can strum that one from the fourth string, but also the bottom 5 strings, strings 1 to 5, are all included in that chord. So if you want to use them, you can. So final step with that one, if you're looking to strum it, is to make sure that you're not letting the top string ring out, because that's the one string that's not in the chord. So if you're playing that one as well, it's going to start to sound really muddy. So make sure you're avoiding the top one, which we've covered before, can mean if you can bring your thumb over and make sure that it's being muted, it will stop it from ringing out over the other ones. But also if you can be a little more accurate with it, that's perfectly fine. But also just remember, final point, that bringing the thumb over is a really, really tricky thing. So if you can't do it to begin with, don't worry. Make sure you're letting these ring out properly. And as we progress through the lesson, that will get easier and easier the more practice you do. And of course, beyond that, that's then going to help you to work out the bar chords, which is the ultimate aim here. But of course, these are an important part as well. The next chord we're going to do, which is a short step on from the D minor 7 when that feels comfortable, is we're going to do the F major. So you may well be familiar with the F major 7, which can be a great substitute in a lot of instances. But this one, we've got to make sure that we're not leaving that first string open. Okay? So following on from that, if we assume the same position we had with our D minor 7 there, making sure our first finger's barring the first fret on our first and second strings, then our middle finger comes over to the second fret of your third string. The only thing we've got to do is add the third finger in on the third fret of your fourth string. So that can be quite a stretch to begin with, but at the same time, it's just about practicing it little by little until it starts to feel natural. So once again, it's really difficult to keep that first finger flat whilst arching over your other two fingers there. But once you're comfortable with the D minor 7, it's a great progression from there to bring in the next finger. Okay? So it's those bottom four strings that you need to strum. And on top of that, if you can add in the fifth string, that note is in the chord. You're welcome to add it in. And of course, same as before, the top string isn't in that chord. So if you can, bring the thumb over. If you can't, take it at your own pace. And make sure you're just avoiding the top string. The final chord we're going to be learning here is the F minor. So it's only a short step on from the F because we're moving the bar up by a string. So now for this one, we want our first finger to be covering the first fret on the first, second, and third strings. So we need that one to be perfectly flat over the three of those. So that can be your starting place, just to make sure that the three of those are ringing out. If any of them aren't, it's tiny readjustments. Try and keep that finger as flat as possible and make those tiny movements you need to have it ring out properly. Okay? And then the final one along from there is just to bring over your third finger to the third fret on your fourth string. So that one can be very, very tricky because it's quite a stretch, but it's that's going to prepare you really, really well for the bar chords that are to come. Okay, so there's another thing you can do to help prepare, which is now that we've been progressing this bar along string by string, you can always carry on with that. Make sure you're doing 4 and 5 and 6 strings as well. 6 strings as well. Okay, so with those, they're not always vital you're holding all of them down, because with the bar chords, you're going to make sure that some of the other ones are held by other fingers, but it's really important that you keep that finger flat. I've done this lesson in quite a series of steps so that you can have all the space you need to... I've done this lesson in quite a series of steps because it's also important not to practice it until your hand falls off. So if you can, when you pick up your guitar, when you practice maybe a couple of minutes of it, but if your hand starts to get sore, if you get any aches, it's important you move on, go to something else for a little while, and then spend another couple of minutes on it, because it may take a little while to work up to, it may not. Everyone's a little bit different, but if you can, take your time with it, work at your pace, and you'll end up being able to play them perfectly on the other side of it, rather than rushing through and getting to the bar chords. So just spend a few minutes on it every time you practice, and you'll have it before you know it. And that is our whole lesson for today. So what we're going to do is finish off with a practice section at the end, where we're just going to be running through the D minor 7 to the F and to a C. Okay, so try and work on those transitions as well. So it means from the D minor 7 you can get yourself set up and then go to the F. So it's just the addition of one extra finger, and then for the C you're releasing the first finger there as a bar, so it's only holding down the first fret on your second string, and then you're moving these other two fingers up by a string. So it's a really simple movement from there to there to there. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I've had a great time making the video. It's been really insightful for me. I hope you enjoy it. Happy practicing, and I'll speak to you in the next one.